They thought they could bury the truth by destroying two lives, a single mother and her autistic son. They blamed her for something she didn't do, turned neighbors into strangers, and a quiet town into a weapon. But when the truth finally surfaced, what happened next shocked everyone. Because sometimes, the most dangerous lies aren't the ones people tell. It's the ones entire towns choose to believe. The morning light crawled over the quiet town of Clearfield, brushing its pale colors across the empty streets. Emma stood by the window of her small kitchen, the steam from her coffee blurring the cold glass. In that silence, she could hear Noah humming softly in the living room, rearranging his toys into perfect lines, the way he always did. She smiled at the sound, a rhythm that reminded her everything was still okay, even if the world outside didn't quite understand them. She'd moved there only a year ago, hoping for a fresh start, a quieter life for her son. The neighbors were polite at first, the kind of politeness that stayed on the surface and never went deeper. They waved, they smiled, but their eyes always stayed on Noah a little too long, as if trying to read something invisible behind his calm expression. Emma learned to ignore it, though sometimes at night she wondered if kindness ever lived long in small towns. That morning, she dressed Noah for school, buttoning his jacket as he stared intently at a small figure in his hand, a wooden fox he carried everywhere. "It's his protector," Emma had once said when a teacher asked. But the teacher's smile had faded too quickly, replaced by that pitying look Emma couldn't stand anymore. "Still," she whispered, "we'll be okay," even though part of her wasn't sure she believed it. At the grocery store, everything felt slightly off. The cashier, who used to chat about garden tomatoes, barely looked at her. Two women by the magazine rack ended their conversation the moment Emma walked past. She caught fragments, her name, Noah's, and the sound of quiet laughter hidden behind lowered voices. She didn't know what had changed, only that something had. The space between her and everyone else felt wider that day. On the way home, Emma stopped the car when Noah pointed at the old community center. "Mom," he said softly. "Someone's there." She followed his gaze, a flicker of movement behind the darkened windows. But when she looked again, there was nothing. Maybe she imagined it, maybe not. Either way, her chest tightened with that quiet, creeping sense that something was beginning. The next evening, she found an envelope slipped under her door, no return address, no handwriting on the front. Inside was a folded note that smelled faintly of cigarettes and rain. It said only 3 words, "Be careful, Emma." She read it twice, trying to convince herself it was some cruel prank. But the sound of Noah's hum from the other room reminded her. Peace rarely lasts long for people like them. She didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house became a whisper, every shadow a question. When morning came, her eyes were red, but her voice steady as she helped Noah into his shoes. "Is something wrong?" he asked, tilting his head. "No," she said, forcing a smile. But he noticed the tremor in her fingers. He always did. At school drop-off, another parent avoided her eyes. The principal offered a smile too wide to be real. Emma felt the weight of invisible accusation pressing on her back. Something had happened. Something no one would tell her yet. And the silence was worse than any truth could have been. Later, as she walked through town, she noticed the posters on the bulletin board outside the diner. Something about missing church funds, a plea for accountability. Her name wasn't there, but she felt its ghost written between the lines. People avoided her eyes as they passed, some offering tense smiles, others pretending she wasn't there at all. Back home, Noah was building towers with his blocks. "Mom," he said suddenly, "people look sad today." She hesitated. "Why do you think that?" He shrugged, his bright eyes lost somewhere far away. "Because they think bad things about good people." The words stayed echoing long after he went silent again. Emma sat at the table that night, staring at the note. "Be careful, Emma." Her mind replayed the faces from that morning, each smile feeling sharper than she remembered. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something unseen. She looked through the window again. Nothing but the same quiet street. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching. She decided to throw the note away, but stopped halfway. Something told her she might need it. She placed it inside an old recipe book instead, between the pages she never opened. Trust had once come easily to her, but ever since they moved, it felt like walking on ice. Thin, fragile, ready to break under any wrong step. When Noah slept, Emma stood in his room for a long time, watching the soft rise and fall of his breathing. He looked peaceful, untouched by whatever storm lingered outside. She promised herself she'd protect that peace at any cost. What she didn't know was that the first crack in their safety had already opened. Outside, a car slowed in front of the house, its engine muffled. The headlights cut across the living room wall before fading. Emma didn't move. She just listened. The sound of the engine drifted away, leaving only the hum of the fridge and the racing of her heart. Something was changing in Clearfield, and deep down she knew it had everything to do with them. Tell me, if you received a letter like that, just 3 words and no name, would you ignore it, or start watching everyone around you differently? Write below in the comments what you think Emma should do next. The morning after the letter, sunlight spilled lazily across the kitchen table, glinting off a half-empty cup of coffee. Emma hadn't truly slept. Her thoughts churned long after dawn. Every sound from the street, a closing door, a passing truck, made her heart jump in her chest. She tried convincing herself that she was overreacting, yet every instinct whispered otherwise, that some invisible thread was tightening around her life. Noah was humming again, creating melodies only he could understand. She watched him from the doorway, his small fingers aligning toy cars by color and size. There was something calming about his order, his small world untouched by gossip or fear. For a fleeting moment, she wished she could step into his simplicity, away from the fog of doubt around her. Then came the knock at the door, soft but deliberate. Her pulse quickened as if her body already knew it wasn't good. Standing there was Mrs. Rhodes, a woman from down the street with pearl earrings and a gaze that always looked like quiet judgment. She brought a pie, as if carried by guilt or duty. "Just thought you might like something sweet," she said. Her voice was kind on the surface but heavy underneath. Emma thanked her, forcing a smile, though she could feel the unspoken questions hovering between them. That smile faltered when Mrs. Rhodes added, "People talk, you know, but I told them not to believe everything they hear." The moment the door closed, Emma set the pie on the counter untouched. She could barely breathe. The comment echoed in her mind. People talk. What were they saying? Was it about the missing charity money she'd read on the bulletin board? Or maybe about Noah and his differences? The human brain, she realized, fills blank spaces with fear, faster than with logic. And her fear was already painting everything dark. At the pharmacy that afternoon, she noticed more glances, polite yet sharp, filled with quiet speculation. One man stepped slightly aside as she passed, as if her presence carried something contagious. She bought Noah's vitamins quickly and left, her throat tight. The fluorescent lights felt cruel, revealing more than she wanted to see. The pity, the mistrust, the isolation wrapping tighter by the day. She thought she could endure anything but being silently judged for being a mother. That evening, dinner sat untouched between them. Noah was drawing again, lost in a world of lines and colors. Emma tried to smile, but her voice sounded distant when she said, "Looks beautiful, honey." He nodded, pointing at the paper, a simple drawing of their house. But in one corner, drawn in gray pencil, was a car facing their front porch. "It comes every night," he said matter-of-factly. Her blood ran cold before she managed to whisper, "What car, sweetheart?" He shrugged. "It just waits." His voice carried no fear, only observation, the kind of eerie truth children often speak without realizing its weight. Emma tried to hide her unease, telling herself it was imagination. But when she put him to bed later, she lingered at the window. The street was quiet. Still, the image of that gray car rooted itself in her mind like a thorn she couldn't remove. For the first time since moving to Clearfield, Emma called her sister. She didn't mention the letter or the looks, just said she missed her. They talked about small things, The weather, work, nothing deep. When the call ended, she stared at her reflection in the black screen, realizing how long it had been since she'd told anyone the truth about her fears. The loneliness pressed down like a second skin. It wasn't the kind that comes from being alone. It was the kind that comes from not being believed. The next morning, Noah resisted going to school. "They laugh at me," he said quietly, not looking up. Emma knelt beside him, heart aching. "Who does, baby?" He shrugged, eyes on the floor. "Everyone." She hugged him tightly, wishing she could shield him from every cruel whisper, every snicker behind his back. But she also knew the world had a brutal way of teaching difference, and it rarely taught kindly. Later, she met with Noah's teacher, Mrs. Parker, a woman with gentle eyes that tried to understand. "Noah is special," the teacher said softly. "But some parents, they've been asking questions. About you, about your job, the donation money." The words landed like stones. Emma felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. "Questions?" she repeated, though she could already feel the answer tightening in her chest. The teacher's silence said more than words ever could. Afterward, Emma sat in her car, unable to turn the key. Outside, children laughed, backpacks bouncing in the sunlight. It all looked so normal, so painfully normal. Inside her, however, something was shifting. The slow erosion of trust, the birth of bitterness. She wasn't angry yet, just confused. But confusion, she realized, was often the first step toward despair. She wiped her tears before Noah could see them. That night, she decided to walk to the mailbox down the street just to clear her head. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet leaves. She looked around and saw silhouettes behind curtains, familiar faces she'd once waved to. Now they looked away too quickly. Her chest tightened with a mix of shame and defiance. She didn't know what she'd done to deserve this, only that some invisible hand had already chosen her side in a story she didn't write. When she returned inside, the world felt heavier. Her phone screen blinked with a new message from an unknown number. "You can't hide what's true forever." She froze, staring at it, her throat dry. The irony wasn't lost on her. She didn't even know what they thought was true. She only knew she was being hunted by a lie loose in the dark. That single message burned deeper than any rumor ever could. Emma deleted it instantly, yet its memory stayed vivid like a scar. She went to check on Noah, who was asleep, one hand still clutching his wooden fox. She brushed his hair, whispering, "We'll be okay," though the words felt like glass in her mouth. Through the window, the faint reflection of her face seemed older, more fragile. Somewhere outside, an engine started again, steady and distant, like a reminder that the truth was circling closer each day. What would you do if you felt a lie spreading through your life, one whispered in places you couldn't reach, by people you once trusted? Tell me below in the comments how you think Emma can protect Noah now before it's too late. Perfect. We'll move into topic 3, the false witness, picking up exactly from where the last scene left off. Each of the 14 paragraphs below now contains one additional line compared to the previous topic, naturally expanding emotional weight, sensory detail, and psychological tension. The pacing keeps shifting between breathless and contemplative, the kind that makes the viewer feel trapped with Emma inside her unraveling world. The days began blending together, each one a little quieter, a little colder. The gossip in town grew like invisible smoke, seeping through every wall, every small conversation she overheard at the grocery store or post office. Emma tried to convince herself it would pass, that the truth always floats back to the surface. But truth is heavier than people think. It sinks when no one wants to hold it. She didn't realize yet that someone had already decided what her story would be. Noah's laughter, once her anchor, had turned uneasy. He'd stopped talking about school altogether. Whenever she asked how his day went, he changed the subject, or just went silent. Silence from him didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like avoidance, the kind learned from watching his mother smile through pain. That small change pierced her deeper than any rumor could. The world around them was teaching him fear, and he was quietly learning it. One Thursday morning, while preparing breakfast, Emma's phone buzzed with a message she almost ignored. It was from an old friend, Clara Hines, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. The message read, "Em, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do." Beneath it was a link. Hands trembling, she opened it. And there, on the town's community page, was her face beside a single caption, "Caught taking from those who trusted her." The post showed a blurred photo of her outside the charity center. The timestamp, fake, but convincing enough to wound. She couldn't breathe for several seconds. The coffee spilled across the counter as she gripped the phone tighter, rereading every cruel comment under the post. Strangers she passed daily were calling her a thief, a manipulator. Even worse, some mentioned Noah, saying it was no surprise, given his condition. It felt like drowning without water, like screaming in a vacuum no one intended to fill. The human brain has no defense against betrayal from those it once trusted. By noon, she drove to Clara's house, heart racing the entire way. Clara answered wearing guilt like perfume. Strong, unmistakable, suffocating. "I told them you didn't do it," she said at once, voice trembling. "But they said there was proof. A video." Emma stepped back, shaking her head slowly. "There is no video." "There is now," Clara whispered. The words slashed deeper than any blade ever could, carving silence between them. Emma's pulse roared in her ears. That night, Emma sat on the floor beside her couch with the lights off. The video had reached her inbox now, an anonymous email, subject line blank. It showed her silhouette entering the charity building after hours. The angle was grainy, but cruelly precise. Only it wasn't her. The walk was slightly off, the movements too stiff. Artificially edited, maybe, or someone disguised. Yet she knew the world wouldn't care about maybe. People don't wait for explanations. They decide who to burn and why, and then they watch. Tears blurred her vision, but another feeling slowly replaced them, the icy hum of disbelief fading into exhaustion. She wanted to scream, to call someone, but who was left to believe her now? Even the few who still smiled did so with that hesitant politeness, afraid proximity might stain their reputation. Reputation. That word used to mean nothing to her, until it became the thing that kept her up all night. Sometimes she wondered if society ever forgives women who stand alone. By the weekend, cars slowed in front of her house more often. She noticed cameras briefly pointed through windows before driving off. Someone had even dumped trash near her mailbox. Childish acts meant to sting. Noah asked why people hated them, why everyone looked away. She lied, saying they were just having a bad day, though she could see in his eyes he didn't believe that anymore. He was too perceptive, too quiet, too aware. Sunday morning brought a new heartbreak. Mrs. Parker, Noah's teacher, called to say that other parents were demanding Noah's suspension until things cleared up. Her words were apologetic but structured, rehearsed kindness wrapped in institutional fear. Emma listened numbly, her hand on the wall to steady herself. She thanked the woman politely before hanging up. The kind of politeness that hides a scream so well it almost sounds peaceful. That evening, Emma watched Noah drawing by the window again. This time his picture wasn't of their house or the grey car. It was of people, small figures surrounding a larger one in red. "That's you," he said gently. "And they're all looking." The simplicity of it shattered her heart. Children draw truth before they can explain it. She turned away, afraid he might someday understand too much of what the world does to people who mean no harm. Late that night, the wind howled through Clearfield like a distant siren. Emma scrolled through her phone, reading comment after comment, all cruel, all certain. Then among them, one stood out. Anonymous again, typed only in lowercase. "This isn't over yet. Look closer at what's missing." She stared at it, confused. Missing? Missing what? A chill crawled up her spine, the seed of curiosity buried beneath exhaustion. Her fingers hovered, unsure whether to respond or delete, uncertainty pulsing like static in her chest. The next morning, Something was indeed missing. Her mailbox stood empty, door hanging open, the letter she'd hidden in her recipe book now gone. Panic set in sharp and fast. She tore through drawers, shelves, every corner where it could have fallen. Nothing. Someone had been inside. Not just in her life, but in her home. For the first time, fear stopped being theoretical. It became tactile, breathing, alive in the corners of every room. She pulled Noah close that morning, promising safety she wasn't sure she could keep. Her arms shook as she whispered the words into his hair, her breath trembling against his skin. Even then, she caught movement out the window. A figure too far to identify, standing by the street post, watching silently. She blinked, but by the time she looked again, they were gone. Yet something inside her whispered they hadn't really left. They were still there, hidden beneath the calm surface of Clearfield, waiting for her next move. How far would you go to protect the person you love when the lies spread faster than the truth ever could? Write below in the comments. Would you stay hidden or fight back knowing the cost? Perfect. Continuing seamlessly into topic 4, the storm of shame, keeping the same paragraph length as in topic 3. This chapter deepens social humiliation, emotional claustrophobia, and hidden strength, showing how shame becomes both her prison and awakening. Every paragraph carries psychological nuance and slow burn tension, closing with subtle curiosity loops that pull the viewer forward. The next days came with a cruel, false brightness, the kind of sunlight that exposed everything, instead of warming it. Emma walked through town clutching a grocery list, just so she'd look like she belonged there. But every step felt watched, every whisper directed at her back. The world hadn't only turned quiet, it had turned cruel. Silence, she realized, can wound more deeply than words. And Clearfield's silence was deafening. At the local store, the girl behind the counter wouldn't meet her eyes. Coins clinked louder than necessary as they changed hands. Emma smiled weakly, trying to pretend none of it mattered. But the mirror on the wall behind the register betrayed her. Tired eyes, trembling jaw, a woman dissolving under judgment. She left the store empty-handed, forgetting even the bread. Outside, her reflection in the glass door looked like someone she used to know. News travels fast in small towns. Lies travel faster. By afternoon, the rumor had evolved. Not only had she stolen, but she'd taken advantage of Noah's condition for sympathy. That one crushed her in silence. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about her motherhood, her love, the only thing she thought no one could touch. She wanted to confront them, shout until they remembered she was human. But she also knew rage would only feed them more. Noah noticed the change too. He started asking if he could stay home instead of going to the park. Crowds made him flinch now, the sound of laughter sharper, meaner. Emma agreed, though every yes scraped at her sanity. Isolation had become their quiet companion. She covered it with routine, cooking, cleaning, smiling. But her eyes searched windows for movement at night, her mind rewriting every shadow into a threat. During one of those nights, she walked barefoot through the hallway, passing by Noah's door. He was humming again, only the melody sounded different, slower, lower. "Mom," he called softly, "when do good people stop being good?" She froze, unable to answer. How do you explain to a child that goodness is invisible when the world prefers spectacle? Her whisper came cracked but honest. When they let others decide who they are. Then silence again, heavy and final. Saturday came with rain, the kind that sank deep into the ground and stayed. Emma watched it from the window, a storm reflecting her mood. Outside, two neighbors talked quietly under umbrellas. When her gaze met theirs, they turned away, pretending interest in the sky. Shame burned her cheeks as she stared at the puddles forming on the street. The town that once welcomed her now buried her beneath its polite cruelty. Yet she couldn't look away from them, because fear, like lightning, draws the eye. Later, a knock echoed through the house. She hesitated, hand hovering near the knob. It was Mrs. Parker again, holding a pale envelope. "This came to the school office," she said gently. I thought you should see it first. Inside was a printed notice, an investigation request by the church committee about the stolen charity funds. Emma felt the text pulse like a heartbeat under her fingertips. Somewhere amid the bureaucratic words was an assumption already made. She did it. After the teacher left, Emma crumpled the letter, then smoothed it out again, uncertain what to do. The paper tore slightly near the edge, fragile like her control. She sat on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees. In her mind, every kind gesture she'd received in Clearfield replayed and soured. People who once smiled at her were now strangers, wearing her past like a stain. And the worst part was how predictably human it all seemed. Everyone wanted to believe in evil, as long as it wasn't their own. Noah appeared in the doorway holding his wooden fox, head tilted. "Mom, you spilled your heart," he said, pointing to the letter pieces scattered around. She blinked, unsure if he meant it literally. "Let's pick it up," she replied softly. They gathered the fragments together, placing them on the table. The corners didn't fit anymore, some pieces missing. Emma stared at the gaps, strangely aware that they mirrored her life. Stories rewritten with parts lost forever. At night she dreamed of voices, familiar ones repeating her name in half sentences, each cutting off before finishing. She woke up gasping, heart pounding against emptiness. The sound of rain still whispered outside, steady and relentless. In that dim light, she saw something new on her window. Words scribbled faintly with a finger on the condensation. "Liar." She backed away slowly, pulse thundering, and realized it was written from the outside. Panic gripped her. She ran to check the locks, each one cold under her trembling hands. Nothing looked broken, yet she felt invaded, violated by the unseen. Noah slept peacefully, untouched by it all. But she sat awake at his bedside until sunrise, afraid the light wouldn't come. Her reflection in the dawn window looked ghost-like, drained eyes ringed with sleepless nights. Somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't random cruelty anymore. It was organized. The following afternoon, the sheriff stopped by, just to ask a few questions. He spoke kindly, but carried the same practiced neutrality of someone already convinced. "Just routine," he'd said. Emma nodded, answering every word truthfully while her hands twisted the edge of her sweater out of sight. When he left, she collapsed into a chair, realizing that routine questions have a way of sounding like judgments in disguise. Days later, Noah refused to leave his room. "They look at me the way they look at you," he whispered when she finally coaxed him out. She hugged him until he relaxed against her shoulder, tears slipping silent between them. Emma's anger turned to resolve in that moment. Fear might keep her quiet, but it would not keep her still. She had already lost her reputation. She refused to lose her son's sense of safety, too. What if the real danger doesn't come from strangers, but from neighbors who think they're protecting something? Tell me below in the comments. How should Emma fight back when even truth feels like a weapon turned against her? Excellent. Continuing from that haunting window scene, here is topic 5, broken but unyielding. The emotional tension deepens, yet shifts subtly, from paralysis to defiance. Emma begins to reclaim control, step by step, though fear still shadows every action. Each paragraph retains the same expanded rhythm and psychological pacing established previously. The letter from the committee never left her table. Every morning Emma would glance at it, half expecting the ink to rearrange itself into something less cruel. It never did. Instead, it became a quiet witness to her humiliation, a physical reminder that image can destroy faster than truth could ever rebuild. But something in her had started to change. Shame, when stretched too far, begins to harden into resolve. She began waking earlier before dawn. The air at that hour carried a strange serenity. Soft, grey, untouched by the judgment of daylight. With a notebook and cheap ballpoint pen, Emma started writing everything down. Dates, conversations, fleeting details she'd once ignored. It was her way of building order out of chaos, proof from memory. She didn't know what it would lead to, only that doing nothing had nearly undone her completely. Noah watched her quietly those mornings. He'd crawl into the chair across from her, the wooden fox resting in his palm. "Are we in trouble?" he asked once. Emma met his eyes, seeing both fear and trust in them. "No," she said gently. "We're finding the truth." The words felt heavier than intended, but also right, like a seed of something strong taking root. For the first time in weeks, Noah smiled, just a little. By midday, she drove to the community center, the one where the alleged theft took place. The door was locked, but she walked the perimeter anyway, studying things she'd never noticed before. The security camera above the back door, the line of trash bins near the fence, a motion sensor hanging crookedly like a lazy eye. Details. She recorded each one in her notebook, cautious and relentless. Fear followed, but curiosity started walking beside it. Inside, the walls of her mind played back every detail of the so-called evidence. The blurred figure, the off-timing, the grainy image of someone who moved like her but wasn't her. The logic of it obsessed her. Only someone close could frame her so precisely. Someone who knew her patterns, her clothes, even how she walked. Betrayal from afar is cruelty, but betrayal from near, that's heartbreak weaponized. That night, she pulled open drawers she hadn't touched in months. Old bills, community announcements, postcards tucked behind recipes. Among them was a printed invitation to last year's church fundraiser, signed by the committee treasurer, Tom Radley. A respectable man, always first to offer help, always smiling. Emma's stomach twisted as she remembered seeing him near the community office the week before everything fell apart. Back then, his "How are you holding up?" had sounded kind. Now she wasn't so sure. Something in her memory flickered, a sound she'd dismissed before. The night she first got the anonymous letter, a car engine had idled longer than usual outside her house. Could it have been his? Or someone working for him? Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote his name down in the notebook beside a question mark. She didn't want it to be true, but truth doesn't ask for permission before it hurts. The following morning, she went to see Clara again. This time not as a friend, but as someone seeking answers. "Who gave you that video?" Emma asked, voice calm but carved with exhaustion. Clara looked away, guilt visible in every blink. "They said it was already confirmed," she murmured. "They just wanted me to share it." "Who's they?" Emma pressed, stepping forward. Clara's silence said enough. Fear had made her complicit. Walking back home, Emma felt the strange clarity that comes when pain reaches its limit. The human mind can only bend so far before it stops caring about breaking. She wasn't afraid anymore, not in the same way. Fear had burned down so many parts of her that there was nothing left but will. The town might twist the story, but she knew something they didn't. Silence, when sharpened with patience, can slice louder than any word. She started visiting public places again, deliberately. The grocery store, the diner, the church steps on Sunday morning. People looked, whispered, avoided. But she stood there anyway, present, unshaken. Each stare that used to shrink her now fueled her defiance. Her calm became louder than their gossip. Humans don't know what to do with someone they failed to break. They either admire it or destroy it completely. That night, while Noah slept, Emma sorted through her phone again. She replayed the false video, frame by frame, until something caught her eye. A reflection in the charity's glass door, small but unmistakable. A man's outline standing behind the camera. The face was too blurred, but the posture, arms crossed, tall stance, resembled someone she'd seen before. Her heartbeat quickened as she realized the frame might hold the key to it all. She printed the image, marking the outline with a pen. Sitting at the kitchen table bathed in amber light, she noticed one more unsettling thing. The folder where she kept the anonymous note, now gone. That meant whoever framed her had been inside her house twice. Her hands tightened into fists. Fear returned, but this time, it came with purpose. Maybe they thought she'd break again. Maybe they didn't know what happens when kindness runs out. Outside, the sound of footsteps scraped softly on the pavement. Emma turned off the lights and stood silently near the window. A figure moved at the edge of her yard, pausing as if listening. Her pulse pounded against her ribs. Then, slowly, the shadow retreated into the fog. She exhaled shakily, adrenaline burning her throat. Something told her this wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was a warning, or a test. In the morning, she wrote one final line in her notebook before closing it. If they want a fight, they'll get one, but not the kind they expect. She looked out at the gray morning, resolve steady in her chest. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for kindness or luck. She was waiting for timing. And timing, she knew now, was everything. Have you ever reached the point where fear turns into quiet strength? Not because you stopped being scared, but because you got tired of being hunted? Tell me below in the comments. What would you do in Emma's place now that she's ready to fight back in silence? The morning began heavy with fog, thick and unmoving, swallowing the town in gray silence. Emma stirred her coffee mechanically, lost in the rhythm of the spoon scraping against the mug. Noah's shoes sat by the door, still damp from yesterday's rain. The quiet inside the house felt too clean, unnatural, as if waiting for sound to disturb it. She caught herself glancing at the window more often now, half expecting a face she couldn't name to appear. By mid-morning, her phone vibrated with an unknown number. No message, no call, just a brief pulse, as if someone had dialed and changed their mind. Emma stared at the screen until it dimmed, her reflection merging with the faint glow. The body learns anxiety the way soil learns water. It absorbs and remembers. She told herself she wouldn't react, that she wouldn't live waiting for alarms from ghosts. But the trembling in her fingers betrayed her resolve just the same. That afternoon, a thick envelope appeared in her mailbox. No return address. The handwriting on it was deliberate, yet slightly crooked, suggesting a rushed hand or an attempt to disguise it. She hesitated before opening it, her pulse uneven. Inside were several photographs, still frames from the same security footage now used against her, but this time marked with red pen circles around the reflection in the glass door. A sticky note clung to one. You were never alone that night. Her breath caught in her throat as the room tilted slightly under the weight of new truth. She sat down slowly, spreading the photos across the table like puzzle pieces of her own reality. The figure reflected behind the camera matched the posture she'd noticed before. Too tall to be random, too familiar to be dismissed. The handwriting on the note wasn't new to her either. Confident, yet urgent, the kind that had once written committee notices. For a moment, her memory betrayed her, replaying the voice of Tom Radley saying, "Don't worry. You'll always have the town behind you." Now she wondered if that had been a promise or a warning. The more she looked, the more inconsistencies surfaced. The timestamp font mismatched, the shadow angles defied the hour claimed. It was a fabrication woven with enough truth to feel irrefutable. Emma's chest tightened with both terror and clarity. Someone had built her downfall carefully, like an architect building despair. But this envelope changed everything. Because for the first time, someone out there wanted her to know the truth. The only question was, why? Later, she found another smaller envelope tucked inside the first, unsealed, containing a flash drive. Her hands shook as she inserted it into her laptop, half afraid of what she'd find. A single file appeared, labeled, "Listen carefully." Her thumb hovered over the touchpad before clicking. The screen went black, but sound filled the room. Muffled voices, a conversation between two men. She recognized one instantly, Tom Radley. The other voice, calmer, calculating, said, "Let her take the blame. It keeps everything quiet." Emma froze, every cell in her body suddenly electric. The audio ended abruptly, leaving behind a static hum that felt almost alive. Emma replayed it 3 times, memorizing each breath, each pause, each cruel word. The reality of it crashed into her, proof that she was not mad, not paranoid. For a second, release mingled with dread. She wasn't imagining the enemy anymore. He had just spoken into her living room. She pressed her palms against her eyes, half laughing, half crying, the sound breaking somewhere between relief and rage. Noah came into the room just then, clutching his fox. "Are you okay, Mom?" She wiped her face quickly, forcing composure. "Just tired, baby." He looked at the laptop screen still displaying the dark frame. "That's the place from your photo," he said quietly. "The one with the red circle." Emma nodded, unsure how much truth his mind could carry. Then, unexpectedly, he whispered, "They don't like when people see what's behind glass." She almost asked what he meant, but the look in his eyes made her stop. That night, she barely moved from her chair. The evidence she'd stumbled upon felt too fragile to keep, too dangerous to trust others with. She copied the file to a small USB drive, sliding it inside Noah's old toy, hollow at the center, perfect for hiding what couldn't be found. It was a ridiculous idea, maybe, but also the only one that brought her peace. Sleep never came. Instead, she stayed awake, tracing her reflection in the dark window and wondering who had risked sending her the truth. By dawn, the fog returned thicker than ever. She decided to visit the church, pretending it was for confession. The building smelled of candles and dust, air trembling faintly with hymns from the earlier Mass. She sat in the pew closest to the confessional but didn't step inside. Instead, she whispered to the air, as if it might carry her words back to whoever had helped her. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why now?" And somehow she felt watched again. Not by menace this time, but by intent. The priest approached, his kindness heavy with caution. "You're welcome here anytime," he said, his eyes flicking briefly toward her hands as if searching for something unseen. "Sometimes guilt follows the wrong people." The words caught her off guard. Too pointed to be coincidence. Did he know? Was he the one who sent the envelope? Before she could ask, he turned, walking away with a pace too calm, too knowing. The answer hid in the quiet between footsteps. When she drove home, the envelope and photos locked in her glove compartment, she caught another glimpse of the same car. Dark gray, engine idling, parked 2 houses down from hers. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. For weeks, she'd been waiting for a sign that she wasn't imagining it all. Now that she had one, she wished she still could. She parked slowly, eyes fixed on the motionless silhouette in the driver's seat. Then the car pulled away, deliberate, patient, like it expected her to follow. Inside the house, Noah had drawn something new. A larger picture this time, full of symbols she didn't understand, circles, lines, and at the center, 2 hands passing a letter. Across the bottom, he'd written clumsily, "Sometimes secrets want to be found." Emma stared, unable to breathe. His drawings always said what he couldn't. This one felt like a message. From him, from fate, from whatever force now linking coincidence and warning together under one roof. She whispered thank you, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. For the first time, Emma felt the shift between terror and power, the smallest proof that truth could be fought with its own weapons. Yet somewhere in her gut, she knew exposing them would cost her more than fear ever did. Power always does. She closed the curtains and turned to Noah, her voice soft but unshakable. "Honey," she said, "we're not the only ones watching anymore." He smiled faintly, as if he understood something she didn't, and pointed to the window. "I know, Mom. They're closer now. Would you still chase the truth if finding it meant putting everything, even innocence, in danger?" Write below in the comments what you think Emma should do now that someone out there just broke the silence. The rain returned the next day, fine and cold, turning the streets into mirrors of silver ripple. Emma stood by the window, tracing patterns on the fogged glass while her mind raced. Sleep had abandoned her, only adrenaline kept her upright. Every reflection outside felt like a glimpse into another version of herself, one watching, one hunted, one quietly plotting. Somewhere out there, the real enemy was still smiling, confident she wouldn't dare look back. She opened her laptop again, replaying the audio file in slow increments until every detail became familiar. At the 10th replay, she caught it, the faint sound of a bell in the background, not from a church, but from the town hall clock tower. It chimed only on Fridays at midnight, That single clue snapped the edges of the puzzle together inside her mind. Her eyes widened as truth began to take form behind every whispered line she'd heard. Whoever recorded it had been there that night, close enough to know it all. The realization hit her like a sudden pulse of light. Tom Radley hadn't acted alone. The second voice, smoother, deliberate, belonged to someone with more influence than he could ever wield alone. Emma's pulse thudded in her throat as names paraded through her mind. The mayor, the priest, even her old supervisor at the charity committee. All had power. All had motive. The deeper she thought, the more the circle closed. Betrayal wasn't random. It was rehearsed, organized, practiced like a performance the whole town unknowingly applauded. Determined, Emma drove to the town hall under heavy clouds. The flags outside drooped in the rain. The scent of wet asphalt filled the air like something metallic. Inside, footsteps echoed sharp against marble floors. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, only that she would know when she saw it. In the corridor, one door remained slightly ajar. Finance and Records Department. Her heart pounded. She slipped inside before her courage could argue otherwise. Dust motes swirled in the pale fluorescent light. Papers stacked high across desks told quiet stories of numbers and names. But one drawer caught her attention, locked but faintly marked with fingerprints on the handle. Behind her, a motion sensor light flickered. She froze, half expecting someone to enter. No one did. Her breath fogged in the cool air as she whispered to herself, "Truth leaves fingerprints too." Then, with trembling hands, she pulled a hairpin from her coat pocket. Seconds later, the drawer clicked open. Inside were files labeled with initials, donations, transactions, approvals. But one folder stood out, stamped with red ink. Confidential, emergency relief reallocation. Emma's fingers brushed the papers, and there it was, her forged signature, the one that had damned her reputation. The date matched the night in the video. Beneath it, neat annotations in bold handwriting, TR. She felt the world tilt under her once again, knees weak, breathing shallow. But before despair could rise, anger surged to meet it. Tom Radley's initials had always looked more like a badge of service than guilt. Now they burned like scars across every page. Yet something else caught her eye. Another signature below his, faint, nearly erased. It took her a full minute to decipher. Robert Mallin, the mayor. Her spine straightened, blood running cold. The voice from the recording flooded back, words now clear as daylight. Let her take the blame. It keeps everything quiet. The calm authority hadn't belonged to Tom. It belonged to the man who shook every hand in Clearfield. Thunder rolled outside, muffled but deep, as if the weather itself reacted. Emma stuffed the folders into her bag, knowing she had crossed a line she could never step back from. Every instinct screamed that she wasn't safe anymore. When she reached for the door, she caught sight of a small red light blinking by the corner, a security camera now pointing directly at her. A chill swept over her, but she didn't run. She looked straight into it, eyes steady, daring whoever watched to understand that truth had finally found her. She drove home fast, wipers fighting rain like frantic wings. Every turn of the road replayed that phrase. Keeps everything quiet. A lie powerful enough to bury conscience, repeated until it became truth. For years, men like the mayor had built their authority on silence disguised as stability. Emma gripped the wheel tighter. She wouldn't stay quiet this time. Quiet had poisoned everything she loved. Truth, even if it cost her, would be her only language now. Back home, Noah sensed the shift immediately. "Something's different," he said, eyes narrow but calm. She knelt, holding his small hands, words trembling on her lips. "It's almost over, baby." He looked at her, then at the small toy fox on the table hiding the flash drive. "We should give it back to the man behind glass," he said softly. She frowned, unsure if it was metaphor or something deeper. "What man?" "The one who hides his face but not his hands," Noah whispered, returning to his drawings like nothing happened. The sentence clung to her long after. That night, Emma laid the documents across the table again, marking connections with a pen. Lines formed between names, arrows linking secrets and power. It looked like a map of corruption, her life the collateral damage of its design. The sound of rain softened, leaving only the steady beat of her heart. She thought about calling the police but dismissed it instantly. Who would believe her when the very system was signed by betrayal? People trust titles more than truth. Always have. Through the blur of exhaustion, she noticed headlights flash briefly outside her window. Not a passing car this time, but 2 short bursts of light. A signal. Her body stiffened. She turned off her lamps, moving quietly to the window, peering through the tiniest gap in the curtain. Across the street, a figure in a hood stood motionless. Then, slowly, they placed something on her mailbox and walked away, disappearing into rain. For a long time, Emma didn't move. Curiosity warred with fear, both stronger than reason. When she finally stepped outside, water soaked her slippers, cold soaking skin and bone. On her mailbox, secured with tape, was a folded page torn from an old ledger. Written across it in rushed ink were 3 words: "You're almost there." Beneath, a single fingerprint smudged in red ink. Emma stared at it under the porch light, heart racing. The storm around her faded into white noise. It wasn't just truth chasing her anymore. It was discovery chasing whoever feared it most. She stood in the rain longer than she meant to, the letter dripping between her fingers. Somewhere deep inside, beneath all the exhaustion and grief, a strange calm formed. That instinct humans feel when purpose finally replaces fear. She looked back at the house, where Noah's face watched from the window. A new kind of certainty lived in her voice as she whispered to the night, "They wanted me silent. Instead, they made me sure." How far would you go if the enemy turned out to be the person everyone else called a hero? Write below in the comments. Should Emma expose the truth now, or wait until she understands the full cost of doing so? Perfect. Here is topic 8, the breaking point, continuing from the rain-soaked discovery. The atmosphere now tightens into emotional confrontation and moral conflict. Emma's strength meets the cost of truth, and quiet desperation turns into controlled defiance. Each paragraph maintains the same size and rhythm as before, sustained tension, psychological depth, and sensory immersion that keeps the viewer glued until the final line. The night stretched itself thin, the kind that rewrites the air with tension. Emma sat on the couch, eyes fixed on the letter from her mailbox, its red fingerprint staring back like a living thing. Beyond the window, thunder muttered softly, pacing across the clouds. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there watching, waiting for her reaction. Fear whispered to stand still. Something older, anger maybe, whispered to rise. By morning, the storm had calmed, leaving puddles that glittered like false peace. Emma gathered her papers, slipping the ledger note into an envelope along with the evidence she'd collected. Every movement felt deliberate, choreographed by exhaustion and willpower in equal measure. She wasn't sure what plan she had, only that standing still meant letting them win. When Noah entered, rubbing sleep from his eyes, she smiled gently. "We're going for a drive today," she said. "Somewhere safe." They drove past familiar streets, each intersection coded in memory and betrayal. The further they went, the quieter Noah became, watching through the window, counting raindrops against the glass. "Are we leaving for good?" he asked softly. Emma hesitated. "Not yet," she replied, her voice thin and steady. "We're just finding answers." The silence that followed carried more weight than any storm. Beneath her calm tone, guilt thrummed like a subdued heartbeat. She was placing her own war inside her son's fragile world. The town hall stood pale under the washed-out sky when she returned, evidence clutched close to her chest. Inside, the corridors smelled of damp wood and polished pride. When she reached the mayor's office, his assistant tried to stop her, hands up, polite but firm. "He's busy," the woman said. "So am I," Emma replied, her voice flat as stone. Something in her tone made the assistant step aside. She pushed the door open without knocking, stepping into the office where her life had quietly been rewritten. Mayor Robert Mallon looked up from his desk, eyebrows arched in mild irritation that quickly turned to surprise. "Mrs. Hartley," he said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "This is unexpected." Emma dropped the folder on his desk, papers fanning out like accusations given shape. "You framed me," she said, the words cutting through the stillness like glass. He didn't flinch, only offered the faintest of smiles, the kind used by men who think they own every outcome before it unfolds. "I see you've been busy," he said, voice calm, fingers lacing together. "And mistaken." She met his gaze without blinking. "I have the audio," she said. "Your voice, your plan, everything." For the first time, a shadow flickered behind his composure, brief but real. Still, he leaned forward with quiet menace. "You think anyone will believe you?" he asked softly. "A woman already accused? A mother called unstable?" His words coiled like smoke, the familiarity of manipulation sickeningly smooth. Emma stood tall, both hands on the edge of his desk. "I'm not here for belief," she said. "I'm here for truth." The mayor exhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. The clock behind him ticked louder, each second hammering silence. He spoke again, lower now. "You have no idea how small you are in this story." Her lips curved, barely perceptible. "If that were true," she whispered, "you wouldn't be afraid enough to warn me." The tension between them thickened, charged like static before lightning. Something in his expression shifted, control bleeding into contempt. "You won't make it far with that drive," he said, gesturing toward her bag. "People disappear when they forget their place." The words hung heavy, but failed to land fear. She turned, hand tightening around the strap. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but stories don't." With that, she walked out, pulse thunderous, adrenaline feeding defiance where terror used to live. Behind her, his composed facade cracked for just a second, enough for her to see he finally understood she wasn't bluffing. Outside, rain began again, light but cold. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the car, the edges of shock finally catching up. Noah sat waiting, his drawing notebook open on his lap. "Did it work?" he asked. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she exhaled. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Not yet," she said. "But he knows we know. It wasn't victory, but it was movement, and movement meant hope." That night, fear clawed its way back into her thoughts. Every creak of the floor sounded like footsteps, every gust against the window like a warning. She slept in short bursts, waking to check the locks again and again. Yet within that paranoia lived a strange calm, the knowledge that she'd stared the truth in the eyes and didn't break. She'd seen the man who tried to crush her, and discovered he bled just like anyone else. Power, she realized, only works until someone stops believing in it. When she rose the next morning, sunlight broke through a gap in the clouds, scattering warmth across her kitchen. The air felt lighter, but she didn't trust it. Trust now lived elsewhere. In evidence, in instinct, in the small, raw courage that refused to die. She reheated leftover coffee, its bitterness grounding her. On the table lay Noah's latest drawing, two figures standing beneath a storm, one holding light. She smiled faintly, fingers brushing the edges. Maybe he drew what she couldn't say aloud, that survival itself was a quiet act of rebellion. She had no delusions anymore about safety or justice, but she did have something more dangerous: proof and patience. Empires, even small-town ones, crumble slower than lies. The plan forming in her mind no longer came from fear, but from clarity. If power feared exposure, then she would make light impossible to avoid. The first step, she knew, was timing. The second, telling the story better than they could spin it. That evening, as dusk stretched over Clearfield, a knock echoed softly on her door. Emma froze. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar face, the priest from the church, his collar damp with rain. "We need to talk," he said through the door, his tone deliberate. "It's about the recording." Her heart skipped. She opened halfway, caught between trust and memory of deception. "How do you know about that?" she asked cautiously. He lowered his gaze. Because I was the one who made it. For a long moment, words deserted her. The man who had preached mercy now admitting guilt, or maybe redemption. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Then why send it? She finally asked. His eyes lifted, weary but resolved. Because truth was never meant to belong only to the powerful. His confession landed heavier than thunder. Emma stepped back slowly, torn between gratitude and disbelief. Outside, the storm quieted again, as if pausing to listen. When the door finally closed and the echo faded, Emma leaned against it, mind racing. Pieces that once floated apart began to align, the letter, the envelope, the clues that had guided her here. She could almost see the shape of the whole story now, vast and razor-edged. Only one question remained, hanging in her mind like a loaded silence. If this man sought justice, or if he was simply another layer in the lie. And the only way to find out was to keep walking straight into the storm. Would you expose a truth that could burn everything, even if doing so meant becoming the villain in their eyes? Write below in the comments, should Emma trust the priest, or is this just another trap waiting behind kindness? Morning came on silent feet, brushing gold across the rooftops like nothing had ever happened, as though lies could vanish with the dark. But Emma felt the change creeping through the air long before she saw it. A ripple of motion outside. Neighbors gathered in uncertain clusters near their fences, murmuring in cautious tones, glancing toward her house and then away again. Something had cracked inside Clearfield, and people could feel the fault line under their feet even if they didn't yet understand it. She poured herself coffee with shaking hands, the sound of the liquid louder than her heartbeat. The world outside was waking differently, slower, heavier, as if uncertain what kind of truth daylight might reveal today. The priest had kept his promise. The recording was uploaded anonymously the previous night, spreading through phones and gossip like a shockwave wrapped in static. The video contained both voices in full clarity, Tom Radley's nervous laughter, followed by the mayor's smooth, commanding tone as he discussed how framing Emma kept things clean. The town that once whispered in corners now confronted the voice of its own corruption. By sunrise, screenshots had flooded every local phone screen. Curiosity was turning into outrage, outrage into shame, and shame into something far less predictable. The same mouths that had built the rumor were now tripping over apologies that had nowhere to land. Emma didn't go outside right away. She stood still by the window, watching faces shift through disbelief, confusion, and guilt. People who used to turn away now stared openly toward her house. Not with accusation, but with discomfort, the kind that pierces denial and leaves nowhere safe to stand. For a moment, vindication pressed against her chest like warmth, yet beneath it was pain too, a kind of grief that comes when justice arrives too late to fix anything. Noah appeared beside her silently, clutching his fox. "They're looking again," he said. She nodded slowly. "Not the same way this time," she replied, though she sounded more tired than victorious. Within hours, the local news stations began circling. Cars with tinted windows lined the street, cameras angled subtly toward her porch. The same outlets that once printed quiet articles of suspicion now stretched microphones forward, begging her for a quote, anything to make sense of the mess they'd helped create. Emma refused. Words no longer belonged to her. They belonged to anyone who could twist them. So she closed the curtains and stayed where silence protected meaning. Still, through the thin walls, she could hear them all. Names she knew, voices she recognized. People who had once shared her sidewalk, now rewriting their own roles in the story. The human mind, she thought, edits guilt faster than it faces it. That afternoon, Clara came to the door. Her face carried apology, like a wound too deep for words. "I didn't know," she whispered, voice trembling. "I swear I didn't." Emma looked at her in quiet disbelief, not because she doubted the regret, but because she finally understood that complicity doesn't require cruelty, only comfort. "You believed what you needed to," Emma said, her tone soft but hollow. "We all did once." Clara broke down on the porch, hands trembling, tears falling into rain still clinging to the air. Emma almost reached out, then stopped herself. Forgiveness, she realized, was another kind of power, and she wasn't ready to use it yet. By evening, chaos bloomed at the edge of Town Hall. Reporters, protesters, and silent onlookers gathered beneath the carved seal of Clearfield, where the mayor had built his untouchable image for years. Lights from news cameras bleached the steps in sterile brightness. When Robert Mallon finally emerged, he no longer wore the calm smile of authority, just the jittery stillness of exposure. Reporters swarmed him with questions he couldn't safely answer. Emma watched the live feed from her kitchen, her breath uneven. It should have felt like triumph. Yet the sight filled her with something colder. The realization that the man who destroyed her would still find words to make himself a victim of circumstance. As night fell, the broadcasts grew relentless. Emma's face appeared again, replayed next to the mayor's statements, each word of his carefully curated. He didn't deny the recordings outright. Instead, he spoke of confusion, miscommunication among committee staff, and audio manipulation. His performance sparked doubt in the same hearts that had just begun to believe her. The cycle of blame spun again, more fragile now but still alive. Emma's stomach turned as she realized that even caught red-handed, men like him could twist the truth into empathy and sell it back to the same crowd that once condemned her. She turned off the TV, unable to listen any longer. The silence afterward was suffocating, filled only by her mind's relentless thoughts moving between rage and sorrow. Noah was asleep on the couch, his drawing pad half open on his knees. She looked down to see the latest picture, two figures standing at opposite ends of a bridge. One side crumbled, the other glowing faintly with light. Between them, words in shaky letters. "Don't cross. Fix it." She touched the paper gently, tears rising uninvited. Her child understood balance better than the adults breaking the world around him. Later that night, a knock echoed across the house again, quieter this time, hesitant. When she opened the door, a group of townspeople stood there. The grocer, the librarian, the young father who once turned his back when rumors started. Each face wore the expression of someone realizing too late the damage of their silence. "We wanted to say we're sorry," one of them murmured, the words tangled, heavy. Emma listened, something inside her both softening and stiffening. "Sorry doesn't undo truth," she said quietly. "It just comes after it." They lowered their eyes, the weight of collective guilt hanging between them like fog that refused to lift. Through the long hours that followed, the town of Clearfield seemed to hum with dissonance, a place confronting its reflection and recoiling from what stared back. The same cafe that once barred her quietly placed a sign of apology in its window. Social media feeds swarmed with declarations of innocence disguised as support. But behind the curtain of public redemption, Emma could hear something else. The faint tremor of fear running through those who had built their comfort on her suffering. The priest's words echoed in her mind. Truth was never meant to belong only to the powerful. Now she understood. Truth didn't belong to anyone. It simply waited for someone brave enough to stop running from it. When dawn arrived again, the sky cleared into soft blue, fragile and new. Emma stood on her porch, coffee warming her hands, Noah at her side. For the first time, no one pretended not to look as they passed. Some waved, others avoided her eyes. But she didn't need acceptance anymore. She had something rarer, self-certainty carved from survival. The town could try rewriting itself around the truth, but her silence would no longer be their comfort. She had endured their cruelty, carried their projections, and now stood as proof that kindness misused always circles back to its maker. Still, behind the stillness, a question lingered that wouldn't let her rest. If the recording was only one piece, how many others were hidden waiting to surface, and who else knew? The mayor's lies might be crumbling, but power rarely dies. It only changes form. As she turned back into the house, something on the kitchen table caught her eye. An envelope, fresh, unmarked. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 4 words written in the same uneven hand as before. They were never alone. The handwriting trembled, older this time, or scared. A chill passed through her spine. The town had woken, yes, but maybe the real puppeteers hadn't yet been seen. Emma folded the note, tucking it into the same notebook where this whole nightmare began. She looked at Noah, who was quietly arranging his breakfast with the precision of someone at peace. For now, peace was enough. Justice could wait a few hours longer. Outside, birds stirred against the growing light, singing softly over the streets that once spat her name. Still, she knew this calm wasn't an ending. It was an inhale before something greater. A lull before consequence catches up with truth once more. What do you think? After all this, should Emma finally confront the last person who still hides behind the curtain? Or should she disappear and let truth finish its work alone? Write below in the comments. What would you do if redemption meant facing the shadows that still refused to step into the light? The world felt older that morning, as though the air itself remembered everything that had happened. Sunlight glowed soft across the mist, catching in the dew that clung to the porch rail. Emma stood in her robe, barefoot, breathing the last of winter's chill before spring took its place. The fog in her chest had begun to clear, but something deeper remained. A dull ache that wasn't pain anymore, just memory learning how to live inside the calm. Truth had been loud. Healing, she realized, whispered. She wasn't sure which was harder to face. The town had quieted again, though not in the same way. The silence that once meant judgment now carried exhaustion, like a body collectively learning how to inhale after holding its breath for too long. Every shop reopened, every sidewalk conversation resumed, but there was space in their voices now, a carefulness born from guilt. People nodded when they saw her. Some stopped to thank her. Others crossed the street, as if good intentions could hide old cruelty. Emma took it all with grace she didn't fully feel. Forgiveness wasn't a light switch. It was a long walk in shoes still damp from rain. Noah was the first to recover, perhaps because his world had never worked on the same terms as everyone else's. For him, peace wasn't about apologies or headlines. It was simply about quiet mornings, organized toys, and his mother's voice reading softly before bed. Watching him rebuild routine reminded Emma what survival truly looked like. Not revenge, not exposure, but persistence. Sometimes resilience was just the act of refilling his glass of milk, even when her own hands trembled. In that simplicity lay the kind of courage no protest could show. For days, she avoided looking at the old notebook. It still sat on the counter, scarred and wrinkled, a chronicle of nights she'd rather forget. Yet one dawn, the sunlight caught its edge, forcing her to notice. Next to it lay a new envelope, clean and white, with no return address as always. Her name was written in a hand she now recognized, the priest's, though shakier than before. She opened it slowly, fearing what new wound it might carry. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten on aged stationery, its first line making her breath catch in her throat before she reached the end. I was never meant to be the savior, only the witness. There are more like me, those who knew but couldn't speak, some already gone, some watching still. Forgive yourself before the world does. It listens when you do. She read the lines again and again. The meaning felt layered, unfinished, like a truth half-delivered to protect her from the rest. Maybe the priest was confiding, maybe confessing. She wasn't sure, and perhaps that was the point. Truth, she thought, doesn't seal doors. It leaves them ajar so light can keep leaking through. She placed the letter beside the window, letting sunlight fall over it like a final benediction. Outside, the same gray car that had haunted their nights drove slowly past, but this time didn't stop. It simply moved on, engine low, fading into distance. For a second, she wondered if the game was still being played, if surveillance had just traded hands. Then, just as quickly, she let it go. Some fears lose their power only when you stop feeding them attention. And she had no intention of feeding them anymore. That realization didn't feel like victory. It felt like peace earned slowly, one morning at a time. Later, she took Noah for a walk along the lakeside trail, where the fog hung low over water that shimmered faintly with morning light. Ducks glided along its surface, leaving perfect ripples behind them. "The water fixes itself when something touches it," Noah said suddenly, watching closely. Emma smiled, brushing his hair from his forehead. "It does," she agreed softly. "It doesn't stay broken long." He nodded, as though that truth applied to more than lakes, and maybe it did. Maybe that, she realized, was what it meant to heal, letting the surface settle on its own time while keeping movement beneath. Back home, she made tea, the sound of boiling water steady and grounding. A knock on the door startled her, though this one felt different, lighter, without shadows behind it. On the porch stood an elderly woman she hadn't seen before, holding a worn-out notebook wrapped in twine. "This belongs to you," the woman said gently, offering it forward. "He asked me to deliver it if anything happened to him." Emma hesitated before taking it, palms warm against the paper. "Who?" she asked quietly. "The priest," the woman replied, her eyes kind but weary. "He said you'd understand when you read it." Then she turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. Emma sank into her chair, heart trembling as if bracing for something sacred or cruel. Carefully she untied the twine and opened the notebook. Inside were dozens of pages filled with notes, newspaper clippings, names, dates, fragments of corruption bigger than hers alone, property deals, cover-ups, altered accounts, all signed by the same familiar hand. The mayor's wasn't the only name there. There were judges, business owners, even the sheriff. She stared in disbelief, realization cutting deep. Clearfield's corruption had always been systemic. She had only seen the corner of it. The priest hadn't just saved her, he'd left her the burden of finishing what he began. She looked out the window again, the world calm and bright, as if mocking what she now knew. In the distance, church bells began to ring, echoing low across morning air, as if acknowledging something had ended, or begun. The decision weighed heavy, pressing against her like fog returning to glass. She could walk away, burn the notebook, let sunlight bleach the ink into nothing. Or she could stand again, risking peace for truth one more time. She didn't want to decide yet. For the first time in months, she didn't need to rush toward war. When Noah returned from outside, cheeks pink from cold, he carried a small flower, white, fragile, still wet with dew. "It was growing in the cracks," he said proudly, placing it on the table. Emma stared at it, her chest tightening at the simple defiance of life itself. "That's what makes it brave," she whispered. He smiled and nodded, unaware that she was looking at her own reflection in that fragile bloom, battered, imperfect, but still reaching for the light despite the cracks around her. Hours passed quietly as the sun lifted higher. She found herself writing again, not in the old notebook, but in a new one, empty, clean, smelling faintly of possibility. Her pen hesitated at first, uncertain if the world still cared for words written in sincerity. Then she wrote anyway, beginning not with anger or bitterness, but with truth. Once they tried to bury us with lies. They forgot we were seeds. She didn't know who would read it. Maybe no one needed to. But her story, once stolen and twisted, now belonged fully to her again. That evening, long after Noah had fallen asleep, Emma stepped outside one last time. The air was cool, the kind that tastes faintly of new beginnings. She stared at the horizon where the first stars began to show, each faint and vulnerable yet persistent. Her hands tightened around the letter she'd received that morning, its edges soft from rereading. She tucked it into her coat pocket and whispered to the humid air, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I do." Somewhere, a night bird answered, and the sound carried like absolution over streets that once condemned her name. She lingered until the first light of dawn spilled over the rooftops, gold pushing back the dark for good. This was no victory, no redemption owed by others, just quiet proof that resilience could outlast cruelty. Somewhere behind her, the kettle began to whistle, calling her back to warmth. Somewhere above, clouds lifted, revealing sky like open paper waiting to be filled. And when she stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her, a final thought rested in her mind like peace rediscovered. Sometimes, justice isn't punishment. It's learning to live freely after surviving everything that tried to break you. Would you have opened that final notebook, knowing peace might vanish again? Or would you have chosen to rest, letting some truths remain unspoken forever? Write below in the comments. How would you carry a truth too heavy for silence, but too dangerous to tell? If this story moved you, if you've ever felt wrongly judged, unheard, or forced to fight for truth when the world turned its back, then make sure you're part of this journey. Subscribe, leave your like, and share your thoughts below. Your comment might remind someone out there that silence doesn't have to win, that kindness and courage still matter, even when nobody's watching. Let's keep these stories alive, because somewhere, someone is living them right now.